Well, hey there, gang. Welcome back. I'm going to do something a little ambitious here this week. This is a Martin guitar from 1934. Now, don't get too excited. Down, boy. It's not a 00045. It's actually an archtop. This is an R18. Archtops from Martin? Yeah, they made them. They're not that highly prized today. The story is that they really weren't that great and they didn't sell that well, but is that true? Let's look at the figures. In 1935, the year after this one was built, Martin made about 3,500 guitars total. Of those, more than 1,000, that's almost a third of their production, were archtops, like this. In 1934, when they made this one, it was in a run of about 500 of this particular model. That's 10 times more than the number of D28s that they built that year. So these were really kind of the backbone of their line. That's one thing I don't think a lot of people understand, is just how low those production numbers were for Martin in the mid-1930s, the so-called golden era. And they had a really seasoned, experienced workforce at that point. Some of those guys had been there for decades, but they were really only called upon to build 10 guitars a day. So there was enough time baked into the process to really get things right, sweat all the details and all that. I mean, they were being efficient, obviously, but they weren't under the gun every second of the day trying to catch up with the demand. They were probably working more at their own pace, and the results really showed in the output. So Martin, always a conservative company, waited for the whole jazz thing to stick around for at least 15 years, just to make sure it wasn't going to be a fad before they dipped their toes into the archtop market. And even then, they didn't go all the way. Gibson was the vanguard, obviously. They'd been making them for 30 years at that point, and the L5, which is the first F-hole guitar, had been in production for a decade. So 1931, Martin says, yeah, okay, we can make an archtop. It's got a round sound hole, and it looks basically exactly like one of their standard flat-top guitars, except it's got a floating bridge and a tailpiece. And well, they stuck on the extended, jazzy-looking pickguard on there just so the cool kids would like it. But, it's got other things that are really strange, like it's got a flat back on it. It's not arched any more than, a standard flat tops would be. And the soundboard isn't carved down out of a thick piece of spruce, like Gibson or Stromberg or D'Angelico, the fancier Epiphones, all borrowing from violin making tradition. No, Martin wasn't going to do that. So this is a flat top, which is pressed into the curve using just the bracing. It's like a hybrid in a lot of respects. It doesn't sound like an arch top or a flat top. It's its own thing. Later on in the decade, they went to putting on a carved top. They retained the flat back, though. This is the first year they used the F-holes, 1934. Now, they have the advantage of looking cool, but in this case, the disadvantage is of making it really difficult to repair if something goes wrong inside, because in this case, the top is sinking. It's a real roller coaster around the bridge. I believe the braces have either failed structurally or they've come loose. Yeah, there's one note here, B flat, which is causing a harmonic buzz inside. From a size standpoint, this is just over 14 inches wide at the lower bout, which makes it pretty small for jazz orchestra work. It's basically a double O. I mean, it's not a loud guitar. There have been people who have converted these into standard flat top style guitars. Usually it's the upper end models with Brazilian rosewood back and sides. This is mahogany. It's not as desirable. It's not usually an elegant transition. Like the necks on these, rather than being raised above the plane of the top, they're flush, and the angle rises with the curve, so it's a pretty extreme angle. The heel body joint here has to be cut back a lot up at the top to tip it forward a bit, and that removes a lot of material, and also moves the body joint forward about 1/4 of an inch, which makes them look and play a little bit funny. The action on this is, it's not bad. It could be a little lower. The bridge is raised quite a bit, and unequally so, off the feet there to make up for that dip. The main thing is it's got to be tuned down with extra light strings on it so it doesn't blow up. And it's got that buzz, so the owner wants me to fix it. It's not going to happen through these F-holes. They're really skinny. I can't even get my little finger in there. I'm going to have to take the back off, see what I can do with those braces. Might have to replace them and get the soundboard back into shape. So this isn't a job for the faint of heart. One thing about using the super light gauge strings on this is there's basically no relief in the neck here. These are probably 10 to 52s or something like that, so there's just not enough tension to pull the neck forward. Well, there might be half a thousandth at the 6th fret there. At least it's not backbowed. That would be bad. This thing has bar frets too. Some of you might not see those very often. Bar frets are an older style of fret that's basically rectangular in section rather than a modern T shape. And they go into slots sort of the full width of the fret, which can be fun. I mean, not a lot of people have the expertise in working with bar frets these days. It's one way that Martin or other companies managed to sort of influence the relief in a neck back in a time before truss rods. They could put in a fret that was wider or narrower and sort of push or compress the neck in one direction or the other and get some control over the relief. In this case, though, the frets are in good shape. There's plenty of height there. You could take a little bit of crowning in some of these areas, but on the whole, they're pretty good. Having removed all the hardware, I'll give the top surface a quick little cleaning here. And then I'm going to make a little form. Then I'll use some not too sticky tape to cover the F-holes, because I'm actually going to cast the top of this guitar in plaster. Yes, you heard right. This is a mix of plaster of Paris. It's pretty loose at this point. I haven't done casting in a very long time, so my technique is probably off, but it's not that important in this case. Covering the top surface with some plastic here to protect the guitar, obviously. I'll nestle the guitar down into place, and I'll leave that long enough so that there's a good impression. It won't be there for the full cure time, because plaster actually gets kind of warm as it's curing. I don't want to subject it to too much heat. And when I remove it, there we have the surface of the top in negative. So essentially I'm making a custom radius dish here for the top. The sunken portion becomes a hill when it's in relief, and I can carve that away and make a more idealized arch shape using scrapers. At this point the plaster isn't rock hard, it's kind of leather hard, so it scrapes nice and easily, make a nice smooth curve. In order to take off the back, I'll have to contend with the binding, and you can see that the lacquer is actually in pretty good shape all over it, so I'll have to score around it. I'm going to try and save and reuse this old binding here. You know, it's 80-year-old celluloid. It's pretty thin, just loves to crack, but I'm going to see if I can do it. Right now I'm scoring the line between the binding and the side wood, because if I didn't and just tried to pry the binding off, I'd crack off huge sections of the side finish, because the lacquer itself is very chippy, as you can imagine. One of the challenges in this case is going to be trying to reposition the back so that this binding will work. Because of the warp in the top and pressing new braces in there, it can be a challenge, because the sides can do funny things. They'll splay inwards or outwards, and the back might, change shape a little bit while it's off the body. Worst case scenario, I won't be able to use this binding again. I'll have to route a slightly wider groove and put a new piece on. This is only about 1/16 of an inch wide. I'll trace around the inside of the binding as well. I'll work the binding off using a very thin, flexible, and sharp palette knife. This is time consuming. I've got my thumb here to counteract the pressure from the knife so that it doesn't get ahead of itself or crack or, break the binding. Eventually I managed to get it all free in one piece, which is very nice. Around the heel is a bit of a tricky spot. Interesting, the join seems to be sort of halfway down the upper bout on the player's side. I'm not sure whether this is a natural join or if it had snapped there at some point in the past, but that's where it is now. To separate the back from the sides and the lining, I'm going to trace around the glue line between those parts using a scalpel. Mahogany is an interesting wood in that it's softer than rosewood. In some ways it's easier to separate, but it's also prone to splitting too. So I'm working a broad-bladed palette knife into the seam, and I'll push that, trying to keep it parallel with the back all the way past the lining. Then I'll continue all the way around the body. In troublesome areas like around the heel and tail blocks, sometimes a little bit of denatured alcohol slipped into the joint here it sort of desiccates the hide glue. It makes it crispy and even it's easier to separate once you get a little bit of alcohol into it. That can be kind of messy, but it's a help. It's difficult to heat a thing like this up because you'd end up damaging the finish. So there's usually a little bit of fibers left over when you're taking off the heel block area. And when I get to the braces on the inside, which are housed into the lining, what I do is I cut through them at quite an acute angle to the side. That way I'm keeping the braces at full length, but they're also free from the lining. Finally get to the area of the heel block here, and I'm going to open it up. The last few fibers come away. Ta-da! Some interesting things going on inside here. It's pretty standard X-brace, although it's much beefier than anything you would have seen in a flat top Martin of this era. They've got these little finger braces that cross in front of the eye, which is probably a good structural move in a flat top that's arched as much as this is. There's a pencil mark here. It looks like a scribble. It's completely indecipherable. It goes underneath this brace. Here's the really interesting thing. It's a bit of a mystery to me. There are 4 little round clean spots, for lack of a better term. They're sort of in a rectangular configuration here on the underside of the top, about 5/16 of an inch in diameter, and they are surrounded by this dirty looking stain it almost looks like soot to me, or like powdered graphite, or charcoal or something. I have no idea what these are for. It's almost like when you're doing finishing and you upend something and put it on 4 little posts so that the finish can dry. But it wouldn't be part of the finishing operation in this case, because the guitar would have been fully assembled prior to spraying. It's not like they're marking out brace locations. I have no idea what these are. If you do, let me know. Well, here we have the culprit. There's a split through the lower half of the X brace on the base side here. It extends about 2.5 inches down from the crossing, basically reducing its height by half in this really crucial area where downward pressure is the greatest. And it goes all the way through the brace. Now this is interesting because the treble side of the X is made from Quarter-Sawn material, but this base side one here, this side is flat-sawn. You can see the annular rings on top of this brace, but they're on the side of the one that's split. So was that grain direction intentional? Was this some design feature? Someone wants to loosen up the base side by making this less stiff? Or was it just being frugal with material? As you can see over here, they ran out of lining. So they made up a short little piece of, it's just a glue block to fill in the space. Works fine. You're never going to see it unless it's 85 years later and you're a repair guy opening this thing up. So is this frugality or design? I don't know. The X brace is a lap joint. Both sides have a notch cut into them, and one overlaps and fits into the other. And this leaves a little gap on both sides at the top that Martin uses a piece of glue-soaked linen to kind of secure and hold together. In this case, the linen has failed as well on the side with the split. There's a crack through it here. So this is really kind of free-floating. And of course this, in the area that's open here, this is an end grain to a side grain glue joint. So it's always going to be a bit sketchy. So the linen works okay for standard flat tops, but these guys here have a different kind of force at play on them. The top is being pushed down by the bridge rather than being pulled up and sideways. Quarter-Sawn versus Flat-Sawn. Why use quarter-sawn wood for braces? Irvin Samaji did some tests a long time ago and determined that in spruce examples of similar density, there really isn't much difference at all in the stiffness between them, assuming that they're perfectly quarter-sawn and perfectly flat-sawn. In historical lute construction, all of the braces were flat-sawn. Probably because they were using offcuts of split soundboard wood. It was there, and when they turned it up on edge, it happened to be exactly the right size for their braces, so that's what they used. Stiffness is one thing, but I also have to question whether they move, bow, or cup in different ways, depending on the orientation of the wood. Because what caused this crack? Was this an inherent weakness in the wood? Was it dryness? Was the bridge subjected to a shock, like it was in the case one day and it fell over? Maybe a kid sat on it. Would this have happened if this was a quarter-sawn brace? I can't answer that question, but I can say that the new one I'm going to make is going to be quarter-sawn for my own peace of mind. I started off thinking perhaps I could remove the braces in one piece, so I separated them from the lining at the ends, and I decided to try some de-glue goo. There was quite a buildup of glue along the edges. Using heat and a palette knife, I didn't like what was happening. The de-glue goo has acetic acid, which is basically like vinegar. It reacts with the iron in the knife and creates a blue stain on the soundboard. So I thought, you know what, it's taking a very long time and it's going to stain things and look ugly, so I'm just going to cut them away. I wasn't going to save the broken brace anyhow, so I'm going to pare those away with a chisel and took off the bridge pad here, which is very small and very thin. I'm not sure what exactly it was supposed to be doing. For the new braces, I decided to split some spruce. I like to split it because that gives you a true assessment of how the grain runs in the piece of wood, and you can be sure of where the run out is. After I've planed that down to align with the split, I can cut off some pieces on the table saw here and know that the grain is going to be running continuous throughout the entire brace, which makes for a stiffer and stronger brace. Then I can plane the braces to size. These are slightly more than 1/4 of an inch in width, and they start off a full 1 inch in height. For the material used in the bridge pad, I decided to make it slightly thicker than what was in the guitar. It was about 50 thousandths there. This is about 65 thousandths thick. I wanted more stiffness in that area. I also decided to make it just a little bit wider. Going to mark out the brace locations. These have to be pretty precise. I made a second bridge pad, if we can call it that. Something that mirrors the other one in the opposite side of the X. This is where the start of the dip in the soundboard was happening, and I really wanted to stiffen that area up. This is thinner than the main bridge pad, but it's, I think it's a little added insurance. I'm retaining the angle of the X, which will help me in doing the joinery later on. With the guitar back in the plaster cast and everything sitting inside my little knockdown Go Bar deck, I'll glue those pads in place. The pads go in slightly oversized, so if there's any slippage when it's gluing, I can carve them back right to the line. Now on to carving the braces, which is a really difficult task. More difficult than you'd imagine even if you've built your own guitar, because this isn't like it's sitting in a standard radius dish. It's not a smooth curve. This thing twists from one side to the other. There are dips, hills and valleys and things, and it's got to fit perfectly. So I start by carving some material off on both ends of the brace so that it'll sit down closer to where it should be. I'm going to be honest, this whole process took me about 1.5 hours for each brace. Once I get it close, I can start using carbon paper, pulling that between the brace and the soundboard to see where the high spots are, get in there, plane a little, file a little, plane a little again, and eventually get it down to the point where I can't fit a feeler gauge in between the two parts. Finally, I could mark and cut the lap joint. Fits together nice and snug. Then I'll glue those in place. Rather than using linen, I'm going to glue on a pad of spruce, which will bridge the joint between both halves of the X. I think it's just a safer way of doing things. It's what I do in my own guitars. I glued it on. Now I'm planing it down. It's about 2 millimeters thick when I'm done. You can see that I've cut away a section of the lining there at the end of the brace, because I'm going to want to put a glue block there when I'm done that will tie the brace into the side and make it good and firm and secure, which is the same thing that Martin does. I don't like to leave the ends of the brace free floating. And I'll carve these down. Basically I'm going for a sort of rounded cross section that tapers towards the ends, similar to the original pattern. Alright, I think I'm ready to put the back on. Should have one last look here before I do that. This bracing is very similar to what came out of the guitar. No major changes. Might be a little bit stronger here in the upper bout. I didn't start the taper until farther up the arm. So this section here is a bit more beefy, which I think is a good thing. Hopefully it'll counteract the tendency for it to dip there in front of the bridge. But the bottom side, that's pretty much stock. So I hope it does well. Should do the trick. Here's the real nail biter in all this. Sometimes they go together just fine. Other times they don't play nice. I've had a couple of Gibsons over the years that just sprang out into all kinds of weird directions. So I was like having to push in on the lower bout and the upper bout in different areas trying to get it to equalize, but it never really wanted to match the outline again. They seem pretty good. The braces all fit back into their pockets, right? So it seems good so far. Now, will we get really lucky and have this work out for us? There's one little section down here in the lower bout where a little bit of finish came off the body here. If I can match that up, I'll be really happy. Oh, it's feeling really good so far. The question remains, what's the best way of reassembling this? Do I try to stick the back on first and then put the binding on? Sometimes things can slip around, right? In this case, it seems to fit so nicely when the two go on together. And a binding this thin, if I'm misaligned by, a 64th of an inch, that's a lot. So I'm wondering, I think the best thing to do is probably try to put both of them on at the same time, which is not my usual way of doing things, but I think it's going to work in this case and it'll be the best idea. I'm using fish glue. Why? The super long open time. It's longer than Titebond even, and it gives you a lot of the properties of hide glue. And I'm going to need some extra time in this case if I'm going to get the back on and the binding on in the same operation. There'll be some maneuvering involved. People ask if fish glue smells bad. It really doesn't. There's a slight chemical smell to it. Unless you leave a dirty glue brush in a cup of water for 3 or 4 days, that's when the fragrance starts. But to be honest, 5-minute epoxy smells more like fish than fish glue to me. So I've got the back in place, it's sort of taped in the right spot, and I'll work my way around the outline, trying to keep the edge of the binding flush with the edge of the side. Put a little glue in the channel there. This stuff is pretty easy to clean up. If you get it within a day, you can just sort of scrub it off with cold water. So I'm not too worried about the excess. This is a place where I wouldn't use super glue, for instance, because that would be a real nightmare. I'm going to use regular green painter's tape to hold the binding in place here. That's kind of a judgment call. But really, although the back has got scratches on it, the finish is actually in pretty good shape. It's not flaking off. If it was, there's a potential that you'd remove a lot of it when it came time to remove the tape. But in any case, I have to stick it down somehow, and this is what I'm going to use. I'm feeling pretty confident. I'll snug the back down using the spool clamps. I'm not going to crank these down too tight. Don't want to crack the finish. Don't want to leave big indentations in anything. And don't want to clamp the tape so hard that it sticks too much. It's the next day. Tape's coming off just fine with the aid of a hairdryer. Just gently warming it. I'm going to do a little bit of touch-up with a marker. This is not filling in the scratches. This is just taking some of the visual impact away from them. It's still there, but your eye isn't immediately drawn to it. So Winsor & Newton Burnt Sienna matches pretty well with Martin's Mahogany. Do a little bit here on these weird side grain scratches. Put a little on, sort of rub it in, dab it off. Either the binding shrank or the back got a little bit wider, but there's about a 2 millimeter gap left in the seam between the edges of the binding. So I'll mix up a little bit of black epoxy here and make a fill. Let that dry and level it off. The slightly rough edges left over from scoring around the binding need some attention here, so I'm going to paint using a little bit of, it's a mixture of shellac and lacquer. 3 parts shellac, 1 part lacquer, which brushes better than lacquer and is harder than shellac. So this is my preferred touch-up material for this kind of thing. Just going to wet both surfaces, get it down in the crack, and this will take probably about 3 coats because there's some chipping around the edges as well, which I need to fill in. Well, all right. I still have to put a couple more coats of lacquer on the edge over the next few days before I can sand and buff it up to a nice shine, but it's back together enough for you to get an impression of what it'll be like. There's much less dip in the top, and it feels a lot more solid. It's got 12 to 54 strings on it now, and it's standing up to the tension just fine. That annoying buzz is gone. All in all, it's a fun little guitar. Bar frets take a bit of getting used to. You can feel the difference. There's a distinct corner that your fingers bump up against as you're sliding up and down. So I'll play a little bit and we can all experience the joys of a pre-war Martin.